My name is Dr. Ruby Cain, and I'm assistant professor here at Ball State University. I am also director of 2 master degree programs, 2 graduate certificates, and director of It Is Well With My Soul community program. So I'm going to talk about cultural collisions as it relates to community engagement in the academy. So today, we're going to be talking about several different things. We'll be talking about culture, we'll talk about community engagement, and then we'll also talk about graduate education, because I just teach graduate students. And our university has a huge emphasis on community engagement and immersive learning for the undergraduate students. It's a lot more difficult at the graduate level because the students are not traditional students. They don't live on campus, so they don't have access or extra time in the way that undergraduates who live on campus may have. Many of them are married, many of them are working full-time jobs, and so it really is a little more difficult, well, not a little more, a lot more difficult in order to make these types of activities work. However, it's very necessary. One of the things that employers agree upon is that the top skills that they're looking for is the ability to problem solve, creatively think, and to work together in diverse teams. All of those things are what happens in an immersive learning or community engagement initiative within your educational program. So what is culture? Does anyone know what culture is? It's actually very simple. It's usually shared rules, values by a group. And when you look at cultural identities, no one person has one culture. We all have multiple cultural identities. And one of the very interesting things is, even if we live in the same household, we don't necessarily possess all of the same cultural identities. My sister and I are about 13 months apart, and what's very interesting is that you'd never think that we were related to each other. We have different interests. We have different tastes in clothes, tastes in activities, life experiences, and even as we grew up in the same household, we did not have the same experience. One example is, although we were very close, almost as close as twins, but not quite, I was the older child. She was the younger child. And so that's a cultural identity. What are some of the things that people say about the older child? Caretaker, yes. Bossy, absolutely, absolutely. Because they've been given, in many cases, they've been given a lot of responsibility, so they tend to want to tell their siblings what to do, whether or not they were told to do this. So that's absolutely true. Anything else? Everyone in here must be the older child because you're not wanting to talk about this. So let's go on to the younger child, the youngest in the family. What are some things you heard? It may not be your younger sibling, but or especially if it's you, it may not be true of you if you're the youngest, but what have you heard about the youngest in a family? Perfect. He must be the youngest in his family. That's usually not the one that comes up. There's a commercial on TV right now where the mother with her first child is very careful. She will not even let you hold the baby until she sanitizes you almost fully, your hands, everything. And then the next one comes along, and it's a totally different experience. The pacifier falls on the floor, and she just picks it up, licks it off, and gives it back to the baby. Never would she have done that with the first child. So they may not get as much attention, or if they get attention, it's really they get more of the things that the older child didn't get. So the older child may feel like they are spoiled. I didn't hear anyone say that. Of course, the younger sibling would never say that. They would say perfect, right? Perfect, responsible, some of the things that you were saying about the older child. So it is very difficult for us to understand that even though we may live in the same region of the country, we may go to the same schools, we may even live in the same family, in the same household, but we're not alike. We will still be different. We will have some cultural identities that do not overlap. And one of the things that I love is, well, sometimes I don't love it, but when we get together, we talk to our children about our growing up. And there are not too many instances where we have the same memory. She remembers it differently than I remember it. And I remember it differently than she does. I'm right, and she's wrong. But if you were to ask her, she's right, and I'm wrong. So what we remember about an incident is really couched in what our cultural identities are at the time. And we tend to have a lot of problems with that. So when we talk about this particular topic of connecting community, campus, and culture, everybody wants to do it. There's no one who would say that's a bad thing, but it's very difficult to do. And there will be some level of dissonance as individuals do try to make that happen. So when we're looking here, these are some of just a small number of cultural identities that could exist. Does anyone see themselves up there? Like, let's talk about generational. I always like that one. Generational cultures. How many baby boomers are in the room? Raise your hand. Okay. How many Gen Xers are in the room? The sibling who was perfect raised his hand, and there is no way he could be Gen X. Unless, of course, he's one of those individuals that ages rapidly. He lives 10 years in 1 year. But that's okay. He gets to pick his own cultural identity. If he wants to be Gen X, he can be Gen X. How about millennials and Gen Ys in the room? Oh, okay, so we really have in this room, it looks like, unless they didn't raise their hands, more Gen X's, more Gen Ys than we did the baby boomers. Do we have anyone of the World War generation, the GI generation in the room? Okay, we don't have any. Or they may not admit it, huh? But, okay, here is someone that I know, you don't know, but it's my daughter when she was little. And I think she was probably about 9 months old on that picture. But how many of you have children? Okay, a fair number. And how many of you love to tell stories about your children that they find embarrassing? Same ones, raise your hands. And how often did your parents tell, or even your aunts and uncles? I think my uncle was worse than my parents about telling a story about me when I was too young to even know that I had done that. And he thought it was cute, and I thought it was embarrassing. How many have had relatives tell embarrassing stories about you? Okay, so this probably won't be too embarrassing. But when my daughter was about 4 years old, she came up to me and said, I can't wait until I'm grown, because then nobody will be the boss of me. Now, that was the first time I'd ever heard that. But and she was in daycare at the time, but my understanding that everybody at the daycare really knew about this, because they would say, you're not the boss of me to another toddler, or I wish you weren't the boss of me. So she comes home and she says that, and I tell her, honey, when you are grown, everybody's the boss of you. You are so fortunate now because you only have maybe 2 bosses, 3 bosses. But once you grow up, everybody tells you what to do. So, part of our cultural lens may make us blind to some of the realities of what's going on around us. And I, as an adult, was probably blind to a lot of the realities that she experienced at the age of 4. So let's talk about cultural collisions. And what do you think of when I say cultural collisions, especially with the picture on the screen? Yes?
As a classroom teacher, some of the cultures of our younger students clash with some of the cultures of some of the teachers or staff.
Yes. What he said, if you didn't hear it on the other side of the room, is that as teachers, many of our cultural issues, expectations vary and clash with our students. It's absolutely true, because we had different experiences than what they grew up with. Some of the things that we would never have done as children, they don't think twice about doing it. And there are some things that they do that we wish we could have done at that age, because not only do they have more freedom, they have more access to resources, so they really do think creatively about quite a few things, whereas we may have only been concerned with eating, sleeping, going to school, and let's see, what else is there? Eating, sleeping, going to school. Yeah. Oh, we didn't go to the mall in my generation. There was no mall in my generation. But when we talk about this, and we've already talked about how it can happen in different regions, we are clashing into each other, not because we want to, not because we intend to, but because we don't know. So when we try to connect community, campus, and culture, what we perceive as necessary in the university or even from the student's perspective is totally different than what is being expected from the actual community. So what is the value of connecting all of those? And university, student, and community. There are challenges and there are definitely value to that. The challenge for the university is definitely liability. One of the values is to be making a investment into the community in which they live. We hear town versus gown, and usually the university is almost seen like a different city, and maybe the faculty and the students don't venture into the community as much, although they have vast resources that could be highly valuable to that community. And then there's, from the student's perspective, is they're there to get a grade, they're there to get a degree, they're there to accomplish certain things, and they want to do it as expeditiously and productively as possible. when you start connecting community with the academy, things don't always go at the pace that you want them to go. It's so much easier to walk alone than it is to walk in tandem with maybe 10 people. Doesn't mean that it's not valuable to do that, but it is a distinct challenge and difficulty. And if you've never done it before, you're not so sure that's what you want to do. So from the community's perspective, one of the challenges would be, I don't think they have my best interests at heart. I think that they're looking at using my community to get something that's of value to the university. So how do you go about ensuring that it's a mutually productive interaction and relationship? And the only way you can do that is if you listen to what the community is really interested in. And if you let the community, even to a great extent, lead the project. Because you're talking about providing something in that community, but who knows it better than the community members themselves? So you may have established a timeline, but it needs to be revisited if the timeline was not agreed upon by the community leaders. You can't come in and do things in the community the way you can do them in the classroom. And you really want to have that type of experience for your students and for the university. So in closing, what I'd like to say is it's definitely worth the challenge, it's worth the effort, and we will always be better together. Thank you.